Welcome, everyone, to Protecting Every Future, which is an initiative of the American Council of Life Insurers to create a community that talks about really important things to all of us, and that's financial protection and family financial security. We like to talk as if we're at a kitchen table. We brought our coffee cups here, and we brought you a couple of terrific experts who not only know a lot, but are getting things done that are important. And we're very grateful to have Tom Foley here, who's Executive Director of the National Disabilities Institute, and also Senator Bob Casey from Pennsylvania, who is on the all-powerful Senate Finance Committee and also chair of the Special Committee on Aging. Welcome to both of you.
It was good to be with you. Thank you.
Well, we will jump in with the first question. Senator, I'm going to give this to you because you're out there talking to your constituents, and Pennsylvania is a big state with lots of points of view. What are you hearing about retirement security in particular?
Well, Susan, thanks. And I want to thank you and Tom for taking this opportunity. We hear a good bit about it on the road throughout a state like ours, but I'm sure it's no different than most states where people are worried about retirement security because of some of the barriers that exist right now. You could itemize a long list, but maybe I'll just cite a few. These are what I would describe as barriers to savings for vulnerable Americans. One would be just the basic barrier that a lot of families don't have generational wealth that gets passed on to children. And often that's the result of historic discrimination. But it could also be because of the financial circumstances of prior generations. So that's certainly one barrier for families. Another barrier is caregiving responsibilities, which is not just affecting millions of Americans, it's affecting tens and tens and tens of millions of Americans who have to leave their job to care for a loved one. They do it out of an act of love, and we don't give them very much help in doing that work. They leave the labor market, and that places not only financial, but other stress on them. And the burdens that they shoulder are not equally distributed. Women, in in most instances, are the ones who were called upon to be caregivers, and that creates all kinds of burdens. So that becomes another barrier to savings because of the change in the work that they're doing, caring for a loved one instead of continuing to pursue a career in the job that they had. And finally, the last barrier is among the worst, and that's government policy that punishes people for savings. Programs like SSI or Medicaid are so important to our families, but they often, in many cases, for many families, they run into these strict asset limits that literally punish families with a loss of health care or income if they have more than $2,000 or $3,000 in savings. So a person with a chronic condition or someone who has a disability or caregiving responsibilities may not be saving, and that creates all kinds of challenges for them because policies threaten them with the loss of their health care, their benefits, if they in fact save. So I think a lot of Americans don't have a full appreciation for what some of their fellow citizens are up against when it comes to these barriers.
Well, I think you outlined well and succinctly the spectrum of challenges. And, I guess the good news is we're all living longer, provided you're healthy and have saved enough for retirement. And certainly the issues you're citing were there before the pandemic. And I think we all agree, and you're probably hearing this even more from your constituents, that they're even more acute now because people had to dip into emergency savings or retirement savings in order to make ends meet as we were in such a global, really challenged economy. So do you think it's more top of mind with your constituents now than it was even before we entered the pandemic, retirement security issues?
No question about it. Like so much, as you said, there were challenges that predated the pandemic, but ever more so in the aftermath. I don't think we have a full sense yet. I think very few of us do. I certainly don't have a full sense of the depth of the pain and the adverse impact on people's lives that the pandemic has wrought. It's often unspoken. I think that a lot of us don't even realize how bad it was for so many of our families, especially those who lost a loved one, especially those who had some, even if they didn't lose a loved one or didn't get very sick, they may have lost a job or a business or some part of their lives. But even those who suffered none of that are suffering because of the pandemic. So retirement security and the pressures, the anxieties, the burdens that creates are more pronounced because of the pandemic.
So let's go in more to particularly vulnerable constituencies, and I'll ask you, Senator Casey, and then you, Tom, the same question. How does retirement security, is it particularly a challenge for vulnerable constituencies like those people with disabilities? Senator?
Well, first and foremost, you have both a pandemic and then the aftermath, which is not only economic insecurity for a lot of people, even though the job market and the unemployment rate's very low, we have prices that are high, and we live in an inflationary economy, and that creates its own stress. It makes it difficult for example, for so many Americans, it makes it very difficult to budget when you don't know what your expenses are going to be from month to month. It's especially difficult when a person has a disability who might face, and I'll use this reference again, asset limits that prevent them from keeping a nest egg of emergency savings. One of the real horrific ironies of inflation is that even as the basic essentials of life become more expensive and harder to save for, asset limits for SSI and Medicaid are not adjusted for inflation. So the $2,000 SSI asset limit, for example, has been in place since 1989, decades and decades ago, when prices were in a different place. So just a terribly difficult circumstance if you have a limited or fixed income and you're living in an inflationary economy.
And Tom, what's your perspective and that of NDIs on this question about constituencies, people with vulnerabilities, and retirement security?
Sure, and I think the senator hit the nail on the head. Asset limits makes it virtually impossible for many people with disabilities to save, for retirement. And particularly, now, we know from our research that people with disabilities, in addition to facing the inflationary expenses that the senator referenced, we have disability related expenses. And, our data shows that on average, people with disabilities incur $17,000 plus per year of additional expenses that are really, tied to their disability. And, in addition, because of the pandemic, many people with disabilities lost their jobs. And so we see within the disability community a great deal of episodic employment, which also makes it, more difficult, to save for the future. People like this with disabilities, like everybody else, need to remain financially resilient and need to be able to have, a tool or a product to be able to do that.
So what's the most common barrier to retirement for disabled people that is not talked about?
Well, we're talking about it a lot today, but I think it's definitely those asset limits. Again, if someone's working but has more than $2,000 or married couple $3,000 in liquid assets, it can threaten their SSI or even more importantly, their Medicaid. And so really what we're sending to many people with disabilities is this message, not to save and not to strive for a better economic future.
So Senator Casey, you both keep raising the same issue, and I can only imagine that inflation, economic volatility exacerbates all this for somebody with disabilities who's trying to save a retirement. Is that fair to say?
And no question about it. I will say that we made some progress 8 years ago with the passage of the ABLE Act, which doesn't solve every problem for every family. But we at least made some progress when we said, if the tax code is going to provide an incentive for people to save for higher education, why the hell can't we have a similar tax provision so you can save for a disability? And that why the hell question was answered with the passage of the ABLE Act, where we basically set up, in essence, really to be informal about it, a 529 plan for people with disabilities, so that now, since 2014, since the passage of that law at the federal level, but then enabling legislation at the state level, now 46 states and DC have passed legislation to set up these accounts. So you don't run into that asset limit. You can save for a disability, whether it's saving for that apartment that person with a disability needs when they become a young adult, or whether it's saving for more education, whether it's higher education, saving for assistive technology, all kinds of benefits when you have that account. Now, at last count across the country, we have 126,000 of these ABLE accounts set up, and with savings of over $1 billion. But we have to keep making sure that more and more families have that opportunity. But we've got to grow or improve upon even the ABLE Act. That's why I have legislation, Senate Bill 331, the Able Age Adjustment Act, where we want to raise the age, now under ABLE, up to the age of, prior to, I should say, the age of 26, you can set up an account. But if you acquire a disability or have the onset of a disability after the age of 25, you wouldn't be able to set up an account. So we're trying to change that with remarkably bipartisan legislation, just as ABLE was, to raise that age limit so that if you had the onset of a disability after the age of 25 up to the age of 46, you'd be able to set up an ABLE account. And we've got, as I said, great support. This change alone would make more than 6.5 million Americans eligible for these accounts, including over 1 million veterans.
Wow. So why the hell not do it, right? It makes so much sense, and it's going to address so much. Tom, what's your perspective of National Disability Institute on this? Are you all in to help advance this?
Oh, definitely. We're all in. We run the ABLE National Resource Center at NDI. So we've seen over the last 8 years what a difference this can make for people. And it changes outlooks. It says, yes, you can work. Yes, you can save. Yes, you can build a better financial future for yourselves and your family. And particularly with the Able Age Adjustment Act, being able to reach, more than 6 million new people. So really, what we're talking about is giving 6 million people the opportunity to dream about a financial future that, hitherto was not available to them. Maybe that dream is, an accessible van, or maybe the dream is, an entrepreneur who wants to save money to start a business, or maybe it's, that single mom who wants to have a house of her own. Able means, not only having the ability, but having a place where you can, save money so you can have those financial resources, to match your talent, your ambition, and your potential.
When we talk broadly to groups about the importance of retirement security, we, are constantly reminding ourselves that just financial literacy or financial education, people being aware that they need to start, and here's the vehicles to do it, is critical to success. You need the policies, you need to set up the accounts, and then people need to know to do it. Is that something that you spend time on, is just financial education and raising awareness, Tom, of this kind of opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, not only is, savings important, but, financial education, financial capability, having a bank account, building a relationship, building credit, understanding how the credit markets work, all of these, financial education lessons, are critical to people being able to, become part of the financial mainstream, and live the financial life that they've always dreamed of living.
You're nodding, Senator Casey. Here.
No question about it, and Tom articulated it well. We've just begun, maybe, but we have begun, thankfully, to think about the prospects, the future for people with disabilities in a much more constructive and, frankly, a much more realistic way. That and I think too often we've seen disability as a limitation, and so many Americans are proving every day that they can do everything that people without disabilities have. They can go to work, they can have a career, they can save for their future, and they can be such an integral part of workplaces in our society. We have a couple of barriers to knock down still, but we made good progress.
So I'll bring us home, Senator Casey, with what many of us hope is going to happen in Congress yet this fall, and that's the passage of the EARN Act, Secure 2.0, and that your ABLE accounts will be part of that, sort of kind of lay that out for all of our community on what should happen next, because I think we have an opportunity to raise our voice and try to help you get this over the finish line.
Well, we appreciate that help on all those bills, all those issues, because there is an opportunity this year to make real progress. And Susan, as you started our conversation with, this is on the minds of a lot of Americans. And retirement security more broadly is of such prominence that I think you're seeing the kind of bipartisanship that maybe we wouldn't have seen in other years. So we want to continue that more broadly, and in particular to make able age adjustment part of that. It's interesting that my staff was giving me these numbers. The Medicare Health Outcome Survey tells us the average life expectancy of a person with a disability has increased over the past couple of decades to the age of 68, which is much higher than it was, just a few years shorter than the population more generally. So we want to make sure that with that longer life expectancy, that life can have the full measure of expectation, and that means giving people with disabilities the opportunity to save for retirement, or to plan for retirement, to save for all kinds of expenses, including the expenses of caregiving. So we want to make sure that is part of the retirement dialogue as we conclude this year. We hope on a high note on retirement security.
Last comment, Tom. Here to the high note.
Absolutely. No, really excited about the opportunity. ABLE accounts and reaching more people. I mean, retirement savings is about saving for the future, saving for your future self. And ABLE is a great way to do that. It's tax deferred, it's very flexible. And, saving for the future should be available to all Americans. And ABLE accounts are all about not only saving for the future, but saving for what's possible.
Well, thank you both, Senator Casey, Tom Foley. We really appreciate it. For all those out there that might be skeptical that policymakers are tuned in, don't be skeptical. We are building on a great progress that's already in place. There is a proposal that will do even more. And I appreciate statistics that talk about raising life expectancy to 68 and having the means to live a productive life during that time. You know, that's all very, very concrete, very important and meaningful. And we appreciate what both of you are doing to make that all possible. And we stand ready to help. So thank you.